Okay, and now we can go live. Preparing. It says setting up your meeting. We are good.
Awesome. Awesome. Oh, super exciting. Super exciting. Hey, everybody. I am Heather Davis, and today talking to one of my greatest friends, Dr. Lynetta Willis. And we're going to be kind of doing like a little mini workshop. And you want to stay to the end because she's going to be talking about actually another free workshop she's doing next week that's going to kind of piggyback off what we're talking about today. So today we're going to be talking about how to minimize your trigger moments with your child. So super excited. And just to kind of introduce her, actually say hi real quick to everybody.
Hello, everybody. So excited to be here.
So as a psychologist and family empowerment coach, Dr. Lynetta Willis helps frustrated families stop stable misery cycles or unhelpful patterns that keep them stuck so they can create more joy in their parenting or their partnerships. Her Trigger to Transform Parent coaching program has helped parents all over the world to confidently deal with their triggers so they can pass on the best parts of themselves and enjoy parenting more. And I think that's what we all want, right? We want to enjoy parenting more. So I think that's perfect with what we're going to be talking about today is how to minimize those trigger moments. That is a hard thing to say really fast. Like the M and the T.
Tongue twister, especially on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. But I am super excited. I think we're going to talk about kind of like 3 tips, right? Or 3 things that we can think about. And I am super excited. So let's kind of dive in. Like what made you first kind of think about this moment of like minimizing these trigger moments? Let's kind of start there.
Yeah, I was raised in a home where I was loved, my needs were taken care of, and we had some roommates. I like to call them the 4 horsemen. And the 4 horsemen are pain, blame, shame, and avoidance. And those are 4 shall we say, strategies that are often used to keep kids in line. And they were used in my family for many, many generations. And as I got older, I had an experience with my younger sister. I have a sister who's 20 years younger than me. Don't ask me. I don't know what they were thinking, but she's 20 years younger than me. Excuse me. And we were in the kitchen one day and I just looked at her. She had said or done something. She was only like 2 years old. And I looked at her and I said, I'm so angry at you. Don't make me come over there and smack you. And I remember in that moment, I was like, did I just threaten a 2-year-old? And I remember her face was just like, and I was like, what did I just do? I was the cool sister. What am I doing? But that was what was modeled for me. That was in like word for word in the parenting manual that I was handed, and so that was one of those key moments where I remember saying, I'm not going to do this with my kids. Like this, I can't do that again. That didn't feel good. And then as a psychologist, I went on and counseled tons of families and parents. Even before I had my own kids, people were trusting me, which brave souls they were. And at the time, I was a brilliant parent. I was the perfect parent during that period. And then I had my own kids. I was like, ooh. Well, this is different when it's your kids, like when they don't leave your office after an hour and they just stay with you, right? And I realized like there was a lot of stuff. There were times I was triggered by them. There were times where I was overly stressed or times where they would bring up past stuff for me. And the parents that I was working with were dealing with a lot of the same things. And so who I really love helping and who I seem to draw to me are those people. I like to refer to them as revolutionaries. Those of us who say like, I want to do parenting either differently than was done with me, or I want to update my family's parenting manual, and shift how things were done. So this is where I feel I'm called to be, helping parents to really transform how they show up in their kids' lives so that they can pass on the best parts of themselves.
Oh, I love that. And, when it comes to triggers, oh man, I can so relate to having 2 boys and, relate to those moments. I have found though that like I have to really be aware, right? I love like you had that moment. Like I always feel like there's this linchpin moment where you realize, I think I can do better. Right. And I think that's the catalyst, like that allows you then to change like within, or at least do the research or reach out or find the resource you need or things like that. That's why I was so excited when we met. Gosh, it's been few years now, right?
It has.
And I can't believe that.
And we met like this, like interviewing.
I know, exactly.
And I was like, you're one of my favorite people. You're not going anywhere. We're going to be friends.
I know. And then we got to meet in person. That was even better. And so I think it's one of those things that it's so cool when you just like, you're like, okay, I think I need this thing, or I'm looking for this resource. I need this information. And then you kind of stumble upon that. So that's why I'm really excited to talk today just about how to minimize those moments. Because I think it's not if they happen, right? It's not going to be if, it's going to be the when, like when those moments happen, what can we actually do? Because as you, I love that you said, like, I was the perfect parent and then I had kids, I think that's so true. With like before people have kids, you think, well, I would never do that. Or,
right.
I'm not going to be that kind of parent, or,
right. Or you look at the kids in the grocery store on the floor and you be like, oh my gosh, that would never be me. Yeah, right. Just wait.
Oh, yes. Last week, actually.
I know. And my kids are like 10 and 13. So what does that tell you? Like, what? Like, it just shifts. It shifts form. It's like energy. It's never created or destroyed. It just changes form. It's like parenting issues. They're not really destroyed. They change form. They just shift. You gotta roll with it.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to dive into how to minimize, but we also have a free workshop next week. So make sure you stay tight. So she's going to give you all the details about that so you can get registered for that free workshop. So let's kind of dive in. Let's start with like one of the first, and I think you said there were 3. So let's start with the first kind of idea to minimize.
Yes. So, like you said before, it's not an if, it's a when. And we can do things to minimize the likelihood that we'll find ourselves in those triggered moments. And the first thing is to stay in your lane, right? So, a lot of times what ends up happening is, I know this happens to me sometimes, where you'll get on social media, you'll get on Facebook, and you'll look at what everybody else is doing and how everybody else is doing. And then you'll read this book over here, or listen to that podcast. And then you start comparing yourself to the gold standard of parenting, right? And what often happens with a lot of people that I work with, they judge themselves against that. And then when something happens with their kid, that makes them even more flustered, even more frustrated when they can't think about what to do in that moment. And they're more likely to go off, because now we're off center for sure, right? So what I often tell people is compare yourself to yourself. You're going to have a much better time, because what ends up happening is now, instead of looking at, like, I was at the pool a couple weeks ago, there was this guy next to me in the lane, and he was an older gentleman. So I was like, okay, I'll pace myself with him and I'll probably pass him and it'll be great and I'll feel good about myself. That dude dusted the heck out of me. What? I was like, well, the first lap, I was like, that was wrong. Right. And so, but as I'm trying to keep up with him, my form is getting all off. I'm getting flustered. What's wrong? So all these thoughts are coming, like, I'm not practicing enough. Right. And we do that with parenting, right? We find ourselves in these situations where we start to tell ourselves stories and start to shame ourselves. But what ended up happening was I caught myself and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to focus on me and my form. So I started to focus on how I was moving my arms, how I was kicking my legs, the things that I needed to do to improve how I was showing up in the pool. And then he didn't even exist anymore. So now I'm more centered in that moment. My form is better because I'm focusing on me. So how this translates to parenting and what's staying in your lane is, instead of using your energy to try and hit that gold standard that you read about in the parenting book or you saw on somebody's Instagram feed, focus on, what do I need to do? How do I go up against my own standard? So maybe it's something like, you know what? I yelled 3 times yesterday. This time I'm gonna try to keep it to 2. No more than 2. That's my gold standard, as opposed to, I yelled 12 times yesterday. I'm not gonna yell once today. Okay. Okay. Right. And then when you do, what do thing I often hear? It was ruined. Everything was ruined. I yelled,
Mhm.
it ruined everything. Really? Right. So when you stay in your lane and you hold yourself to the standard, you end up minimizing your chance of getting triggered and doing those things
Mhm.
that that you don't want to do, because now you're able to stay centered because you're holding yourself to your own standard as opposed to comparing yourself to that gold standard up in the sky or on Facebook.
I love that though, because really it does come down to like the mirror, right? Of like, hey, we can only compare ourselves to somebody else. We don't know. There's so many variables to every family. And well, yes, we can generally know how, age, like they're growing and certain ages things, as we know, the terrible twos or the toddler stage, or,
Yeah.
those ages and stages of
Yes.
kids. But then but every kid is different. I know my two kids are, even though they're boys, they are
Oh my gosh.
100% polar opposites of each other. And so I definitely have had to parent differently and learn different things. So I love that though, staying in your lane and
Yes.
not comparing yourself to others. Because that is very true. Like, I'm not going to yell anymore. And then, yeah, then you beat yourself up because you're like, well, I failed. Right. As opposed to, I'm going to do it less, or
Absolutely.
I'm going to,
Yes. It's
yeah.
supposed to, I only yelled twice today. I yelled 5 times
Right.
last week. And yes. Do we want to
Right.
get to a point where we're not yelling? Sure.
Of course.
But we have to celebrate our wins too,
Right.
So
Right.
absolutely stay in your lane. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go on to number 2. What is number 2?
So number 2 is about reframing self-care. So I know when I say the phrase self-care, I get eye roll, people stop listening, it's like, this chick's out of touch. I don't have time for self-care. Lucky for you, you could just sit and do nothing and, eat bonbons all day. I wish, no, I can't. But so we sort of like shut ourselves off when we hear that word, right? But what I often try to convince the clients that I work with, or not convince, but encourage them to do, is to reframe self-care. So for the first way that I encourage reframing of it is to think about it like, okay, let's just go along with this idea that you don't have time to care for yourself. There's not enough time in the day, kids are too demanding, all of these types of things. And also consider the fact that we're always modeling, right? So when we don't take care of ourselves, we're modeling that for our children, right? So if you're saying, I need to pour into them, and because of that, I can't pour into myself, then what we're essentially modeling is you need to pour into others more than you pour into yourself, right? You need to pour into others before you can pour into yourself, right? And when we think about it from that perspective, it's like, wait a minute, right? That gives us a pause. The other thing that practicing self-care does is it models for our children, your needs matter, you matter, your body matters, your mind matters, all of those things that every single one of us would tell our children. If our child came to us and be like, I don't matter, we'd be like, well, and we go into 50 million different reasons why they matter, right? But when we don't stop to take care of ourselves, then we're not modeling that back, right? And children, they more likely do what they, I grew up with the whole like, do as I say, not as I do. That's not a thing. They're going to do what we do, right? Way more than they do what we say, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
those are those times when you're like, wait, what did you just say? Wait, I've said that before. Or, oh, my husband said that before.
So true. And so reframing it that way, the other way to reframe it is, if self-care is too much of a buzzword, because I get it, I'll be honest, there's a part of me that rolls my eye a little bit too when I hear self-care. That's too much of a buzzword. Call it something that you will make time for. Maybe it's creativity, spiritual growth, play, right? Health, call it the man in the moon. I don't care what you call it. Call it, I don't Starbucks coffee, whatever you call it something that you will make time for. Right, that is important to you, that feels good to you, because oftentimes we hear self-care, like we think of like massages or meditating for 20 minutes, or if that's you, great, but a lot of us don't have time for that, And then the third way to reframe it is around time, right? So a lot of times we think, I don't have time for self-care, because we think of self-care having to be this dedicated, like 30-minute, hour-long process where we lay things out, candles and crystals and, all these things. Sometimes, like we were talking about earlier, self-care is, I'm going to go to the bathroom, even though I don't have to do anything in the bathroom. I'm just going to go in there with my phone and a book, and I'm going to sit there for 5 minutes, right? I mean, sometimes that is all you get for the bathroom is my massage parlor. Okay. That's the nail salon, massage parlor, all the things, the library,
Yep.
all the things, right? So realize sometimes it's just baby steps, but when we take care of ourselves, and this is not just some pop culture thing, research is so clear. When we take care of ourselves, what we essentially do is we rewire our brain, we rewire our nervous system. And especially for those of us who are trying to raise our kids differently from how we were raised, there's likely that we have some really specific habits, some brain wirings going on up there, right? That needs some attention and that needs some change. So when you say, so taking care of yourself, if you're saying, I want to raise my kids differently, I want to show up differently, then self-care is an integral part of that, because you have to be able to shift those habits and rewire your brain. And we can't do that when we're constantly under stress and pressure and duress. That is an absolute recipe for being overly stressed and overly triggered. So if you can only find 5 minutes, 3 minutes, I mean, hey, you know what? I am not anti-Netflix as a babysitter. Are you like, hey, go watch whatever for 30 minutes or 22 minutes, however long those things last. I'm going to go and I'm going to sit and stare at a wall and watch some paint dry, so if there are things that you can do, and even if they stay there for 5 minutes, that's 5 minutes that you got to sit in the bathroom and listen to it. Well, I don't even read books anymore. It's so embarrassing. I listen to books, I'll be honest with you. It's just, so reframe self-care.
I love that you said that. So do you find, I'm super interested in this because of just even with even myself, do you recommend to schedule, okay, even if it's that 3 minutes, or is it in the moment, hey, I need this 3-minute break now, or I need this 5? I think those are fine too. But at least I find for myself, I have to tell myself to schedule. I have to tell myself, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, otherwise I don't, because then I fall back to regular habits, routines, and, being mom and taking care of everybody else's needs and stuff and all the things.
It's so true. I say you can always tell what's important in someone's life by looking at their calendar. Right? I mean, really. And so you put the kids' appointments, you put their practices, you put all kinds of stuff in there, your work appointments. So my thing is, if it's not in my calendar, I probably won't be there. Let's just be honest. If it's not in my calendar, I might say I would be there, have the best intentions. If you do not see me put it in my calendar, there's a good chance I won't be there. Right? So 100%, you make it a priority. If you put it in your calendar, it's more likely to happen for sure. So, and it might not be the same time every day. That's okay. That's okay. Right? And it's going to look different. So this funny story, my son, they're at a new school now. And at this school, they actually make up monthly goals, which I was like, wow, I probably need to join them in that. It's a great idea. So one of the goals he put on was to meditate. And I was like, oh, and they have to, it's like a SMART goal thing, right? So they have to, what's going to get in your way and make it specific. And so he's like, all right, I'll do 5 minutes every day. And the first thing I said to him was, what time do you want to do it? I have to put it in the calendar. Now it's so interesting, right? Because he said, I want to meditate. Immediately, my thought was, all right, let's get it in the calendar, right? Because that practice for him, we do everything for our kids, right? That practice, if it's important to you, buddy, I got it. But when it comes to my own self, and so I'm not talking from judgment. This is something I consistently work at, even for myself. But the fact that my first thought was, oh, this is important. Let's schedule it. Hello. Yes, we schedule things when they're important to us. And every night, I have it scheduled twice, actually, once at 4 and once at 7:30, just in case we're in the homework rat race at 4, right before bed. I'm like, oh, do your meditation, buddy. And the other point too with that is what's funny is with him at first, he likes to listen to music. So he'll find he has a little Amazon playlist. So he'll pull up a song. I don't find it like it's not the most relaxing, but I'm like, whatever, do you, buddy. But what was hilarious was last night, and this was such a good lesson. His sister came in and wanted to do it too. And they put on this fast, upbeat song. And so my son was like, and my daughter was like bouncing on one of those stress ball things. And my son was like, this is not very meditative. And I was like, do you feel in the moment? He was like, yeah. I was like, does your system feel good? Are you feeling like you're having fun? He's like, yeah. And I was like, and it's meditation, dude. You know,
Yes.
we'll just call it meditation, you know? And so my
Yes.
other point is, I think sometimes we have this preconceived notion about what
Mhm.
self-care is. And what I often try to get my clients to understand is it's what you say it is.
Mhm.
It's whatever brings you towards what I call the purple zone. I have this zone of experiences chart that I created, and the top is red, and that's that fight flight zone. And the bottom
Mhm.
is blue, which is like the free zone or the sadness, and the middle is purple because red and blue make purple, and purple's my favorite color. Purple zone. So it's one of those things where it's like, what's something you can do to bring you closer to your purple zone? It might not even bring you completely in it, but what's something you can do to bring you closer? So
Mhm.
when I talked to them, I was like, basically, because they know the zones of experience chart. I was like, are you feeling purple? And he's like, yes, I'm feeling purple. I'm like, then we're good. We're regulating. That's what's important. So just realize too, self-care looks like what you say it looks like for you. And
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't
so
have
good.
to be anything specific, and it lasts as long as you can make it last.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, do you feel in the moment? Then that's meditation. Like, I
Yes,
think 'cause we all have these preconceived notions. The same thing with the word self-care, right? It has been
right.
totally beat to death in like social media and online and all the places. And same thing with meditation and mindfulness. And yeah, I love
Yes, it
that.
has to look this way and feel this
Mhm.
way. And I'm like, you know what? And I teach mindfulness. Like I'm certified to teach mindfulness. You know? And most of the time I'm like, what makes you feel good? You know, let's start
Yeah.
there. Now, eventually you might get down to that
Mhm.
point of like,
Mhm.
but
Hmm.
sometimes when you're like high red, going all the way down to actually can freak out your nervous system because in the wild, if you're running right away from something and you stop immediately, what your brain says is, oh no, we're in danger, we've been caught, or we're cornered and we have to stop. So stopping on a dime and sitting, that's why a lot of times when people say I tried to meditate, I can't do it, I can't focus, I
Mhm.
can't get still, it's because that's not the way you're designed. That's not the way your brain and your
Mhm.
body are wired to stop on a dime like that. It's kind of like a car slamming on the brakes. You
Right.
only slam on the brakes when something's wrong. You don't
Mhm.
slam on the brakes intentionally because it feels good, not normally,
Right.
right?
Not
So
unless
it's
you're
that
16.
exactly. And you're doing like donuts in a parking lot or something, right? But most of us, that's not the case. So it's like
Right.
for my kids, it was sitting down and being like, oh, wasn't really where they were. They needed to bounce, they needed to move. So that was like their little step down. So sometimes it's just what's a little step down? What's one little step down you can do to bring you into that space?
Yeah, awesome. So good. All right. So number one was stay in your lane. Number two is reframe self-care. What is number three?
Yes. So number 3 is get clear on what sets you off and then make a plan. Right.
Mhm.
And this is so simple, but we don't do it. We really don't. So we're creatures of habit, right? Like the way our brains work, we don't like surprises. So whatever sets us off on Monday is going to set us off on Wednesday, it's going to set us off on Friday, you know. And same with our kids, what they do on Monday is what they're going to do on Wednesday, what's going to do on Friday, right? So when we start getting clear and getting deeper insights into what exactly is it that triggers me or that stresses me, when
Mhm.
we get insight into that and we can get clear into that, and then we start to plan for it, right? Like I
Mhm.
realize every night at dinner time is when I go red. Like I just can't, right? Okay, now that you have that insight, that you have that self-awareness, what can you do to plan for that time so that you have a
Mhm.
different experience, right? As opposed to I just blow up every night at dinner, right? Sometimes we get to that point where we just get, it's like that stable misery space where it's just like we're resigned to it and we just kind of accept it, right? So come up with what's one small shift that I can do. Maybe you take your moment, your 5 minutes in the bathroom before dinner time, you know, or maybe if you have a partner, you tap out at certain points, you know, you realize like, yeah, I'm getting there. I'm just going to go over here for a minute, you know, or whatever you need to do. But first identify what it is that tends to set you off, and then create a tiny plan. Just what's one little thing that you can do to shift that moment. You don't have to do anything big. I tell people, do something else. Literally almost anything else than you would normally do, right? Just to have that pattern interrupt. Just to have a small pattern. Maybe you sit at a different side of the table, right? Kind of like, wait, what's happening, right? Like, do something different. And that helps because you're not falling into those same cycles, those same habits, those same neurological grooves, right? That you're used to. And so you're more likely to avoid that same cycle, the same trigger cycle that we often find ourselves in during those moments. So figure out something, maybe try to play music, see if that works. You know, I always say, like, you know, with my clients, like, experiment's my favorite word, you know, and I always, we always talk about TIAS, TIAS, try and see what's the worst can happen. Yeah. So we talk about something and they're like, maybe I should TIAS, I'll see what happens. Right. So figure out what is it that specifically gets me. And then what's one small little thing that you can do differently? Experiment with it. See what happens.
Yeah, I love it. I think experimenting is so important because I think sometimes people, I mean, at least I see this, like, give me the answer, right? Like, but what works for you is not going to work for me. Like, what works for this parent's not gonna work for that parent, or for that child, or for this or that, or, you know, find out the thing. And I think it's gonna take experimentation to figure that out. I don't think, like I have found for myself, it's not like, I have arrived, you know, I've arrived and I found the thing like that has like solved all the problems. It may be 1 week it's this thing and 1 week it's that thing. And I think that's totally okay. I think the key, I feel like, is like just to be self-aware.
Yes. That's the huge thing.
Like, to be self-aware, to know, oh, okay, I'm in the red zone, or I'm getting to the red zone, or, you know, something like that, to be self-aware. And what is it? I was talking to a friend a couple of years ago, and she was like noticing kind of that thing. She was becoming self-aware, and she was like, what is it? And she realized it was the hum of the dryer that was causing her to be super agitated.
Interesting.
For some reason. And she would snap at her boys. And so, you know, and I was noticing, actually,
that's a trigger.
Isn't it, like, just those like sounds, or, I mean, we all have different kinds of, I know, like Gretchen Rubin's working on a book on the senses, right? Like how our senses really affect who we are. And I noticed that even with myself this morning, there's nobody in the house, but my husband had music playing, but my door was shut and I could hear, it sounded like an alarm going off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why is there an alarm going off? Like on a phone, you know, I'm like, what in the world? He sets alarms and stuff. So I get that. So I could feel myself getting agitated. And I realized it was just the music, because I was blocking a lot of the sound. I could hear that high pitched sound, but I realized enough, like, why am I feeling so like agitated, you know? So I think in that, being self-aware and just really paying attention to your surroundings and what's happening.
The more aware that you are of it, you know, if you can be aware of it, a lot of times we become aware of it after the fact, like, oh, wow. And sometimes we're not even sure what it was because things happen so fast, right? So if you could start to become aware of it, like, it might be the first, you back up into in the moment, you start noticing in the moment, oh, wow, I'm off. Woo. And then you'll start to notice that you notice it right before the moment, but you can't quite stop it yet, but you start to notice it. And then you start to notice, oh, I'm getting to that moment. Let me do something a little different. Right. And then before that, you're like, I'm in that situation that tends to live, you know, when they talk about, what do you call it? Tornado warnings and tornado watches, right? Like tornado watch is like, conditions are favorable for the development of a tornado, right? When you get to that trigger watch place where it's like, conditions are favorable for the formation of mommy's head exploding, right? You can do something different at that point. Now we're golden. Right now we're golden. because now it's not, now your body sensations are indicators. They start to be indicators that, oh, the wind's starting to swirl, I'm starting to hear a rumble. I'm starting to, right? Like the old folks, like I remember my great aunts used to be like, oh, it's going to rain. My knee is hurting. And I'm like, outside, what the, sure enough, an
It's
hour
so
later,
true, though.
it's a freaking hailstorm. I'm like, all right. Because they were tapped into their body somehow, that knee. Right. So we want to get to that point where we can
Right.
start to recognize conditions are favorable for the formation of a trigger moment and do something about it. So getting that clarity. The other thing I want to say about that too, the other thing that makes it hard is I tell people all the time, like, yeah, you read all those books. That's another thing, but that's another discussion. We defer so much of our power to like the book. But one thing we have to realize, it's like, I read all the books and I did all the things and did it. And this is why experimenting is important. You know who didn't read all the books and listen to all the podcasts and take all the DIY courses? Your kids. Okay. So it's like you're on stage and you're reading your lines and then it's their line and they're like, peanut butter jelly. You're like, that's not what the book said you were supposed to say. The book says you're supposed to say, thank you, mommy. You're amazing. What happened? That's what the book. And they're like, they're clueless, right? Which is why experimenting is so important. And also realizing they're developing, they're growing. So what's going to happen? What's going to work when they're 5 might not work when they're 5.5. I mean, it's going to be different. So, and that idea of experimenting, it opens up something for us when we say, like, you don't have to get it perfect. TS, just try it and see. It's really not just, what's the worst that could happen, and realizing like, oh, if it doesn't work, I could do something else. Oh, relax,
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. I do feel like we do lock ourselves in, like, to, oh, I've got to do it like this one way or that way or this way. And oh yeah, we could have a whole nother conversation about books. But so I love that. Now, even with this, just these 3 things, I know people could totally go and take action and implement and make change, but sometimes you need that little bit more help. And so I know you've kind of taken this idea and expanded on it, and you're going to be doing another free workshop next week. And how long's the workshop?
It's a 5-day workshop. It's going to be, I'm doing in bite-sized chunks. I mean, we're so used to the Zoom age of being on camera for 5 hours at a time, but personally, I don't have the bandwidth for that. So it's going to be no more than an hour a day, sometimes shorter. We're going to be, you could sign up for it, go in the Facebook group. I'll pop in live, similar to what you're seeing here, look very similar. And what we're going to be doing, it's called the Create Your Calm My Triggers Roadmap workshop. So basically what you're going to be doing in this workshop is you're going to be creating a roadmap that you can use. You can take away and literally use it to help you not be so triggered or calm yourself in the moment, right? And so in this workshop, we're going to be looking at a lot of the things we just talked about, like what are the specific things that set you off, right? We're going to talk about the 5 landmarks that people often miss when they're triggered, right? We're going to talk about what is it that you want to create with your child? What do you want that? We're going to illuminate that for you so you know where you're going, right? We're going to create a plan for that triggered moment. So for your specific moment, not when I'm triggered, right? Like what are these, who are you? What's happening within you? And what do you need to pull you out of that pit? So when you walk, it's not a generic something you heard on this or read in that. It's specific to you. And I'm going to walk you step by step on how to create that. And you're also going to create a stress management or self-care plan, right? That's again, specific to you so that you can know what is it that I need to do so that I'm not so set off as easily. Right. So we're going to do that and so much more. We're going to have so much fun. As you can tell, I'm all about fun and laughing and making things fun. It does not need to be. That's the other thing. Even learning to get over your triggers and learning to heal your stuff and learning to stop passing your baggage on to your kids. All that stuff can actually be fun. It doesn't have to be like, oh, like I wouldn't do it if it's not fun. I don't do it. I'm too old for that. That's just not my thing. So I know triggers and fun, kind of like, like what, but it can.
It can. Well, and I think that helps reframe things, right? Like the thought and the mood sometimes around that, which always helps the brain too.
Yes, exactly. You're more likely to pour into it and move towards it if it feels good. If it doesn't, you're not going to.
Exactly.
Right.
I love that. So you're going to be helping them create a plan, taking kind of what we learned today. And I love
so
that.
much
I love
more.
that. So much more and so much more. All right. I know we'll be giving people the information to be able to register for that workshop so they can get all the goodness and all the goodies. And any last minute sort of announcements or things?
Yeah, just show up live. There are going to be some goodies going on, but I also know that there are some time zone issues. So you will be able to have access to the replays for a limited time, but do this for yourself. It's like we were talking about earlier with the self-care piece. Not all self-care is sitting on a mat oming, which that sounds fantastic in some capacity, but it's not always that. Sometimes it's showing up for yourself. This isn't about you doing, this isn't like another course where you learn stuff for your children. This is about you. This is about you showing up for you so that you can be the parent that you know you can be, so that you can stop with the guilt and the shame and all of this stuff. This is your first step or another step in writing that parenting manual that you were handed when you were a child, right? So that now that you need to update or maybe just completely toss out and rewrite a new one, right? So this is about focusing on you and getting the clarity that you need to to shift how you're showing up with your child and have the best relationship possible so that when they go off to college, they actually want to come home for holiday breaks.
Yes.
Kind of what we all want, right?
Yeah,
like we don't want our call sent to voicemail. Oh God, it's my mom, or oh God, it's my dad. Nobody wants that. It's like, ah.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lynetta. And we will hope to see you guys next week.
Yeah, starting on Monday.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.